We are here for our Featured Friday segment with the two guys who have been on the show before. I wanted to bring in a veteran from either side of the state line who also happens to serve right now in a political capacity. And we have Kansas State Senator Mike Thompson joining us on KCMO. And from the Missouri side, State Representative Mike Haffner. Mike's, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Pete.
So I said, the only problem I've got here is I picked two guys with the same first name. So I'm going to have to use last name. If you guys are okay with that.
Fine. Sure.
I don't want to make you feel like you're back in the military, but I'm going to have to use last name. So I want to start off the conversation. We'll start with you, Mike Thompson, on just your service, being a veteran, and what this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, means to you. What comes to mind for you?
Well, when I was in the Navy, I served on an aircraft carrier, and this was in the 70s. And what I'm constantly reminded of is I served under two men that had been prisoners of war. My division officer, or division head, actually, and the ship's captain had both been shot down and had served in Hanoi. They were prisoners there. And, of course, I was a young Green petty officer, and this was in 1976 when I reported on board, not really thinking these guys had just gotten out of being prisoners of war. And if I regret not thanking them more for what they did, the sacrifices they made. And you would never know it. They never talked about it. They were just the kindest men, but very patriotic. And here they were back serving their country out at sea.
Yeah.
And, they had been away from their families for all those years. And to me, that's what this weekend's about. Those who lost their lives, those who served. I served, but, I didn't make that kind of sacrifice that those guys did. And just seeing that and working with a lot of people who did serve. And my wife's older brother, he was in the Marines at Vietnam and came back, and like many of those guys, had some real issues mentally and disappeared. We didn't know where he was for 10, 15 years until we got a call one day, and this was about a year and a half ago, that he was on his deathbed. Somehow they tracked us down. And so we rushed to his side and were able to be with him in his final hours. And I didn't know, how do we get him taken care of? He had been homeless, had no money, but you've got this organization here in Olathe, Friends in Service of Heroes, FISH, and that group. And I called them. They were able to get Honor Guard out there who came out. The Honor Guard volunteered, got the flag, everything, and gave him the proper burial. And there are a lot of these volunteers that go around and do this all the time. In fact, I met a guy 2 nights ago when I was out walking on the campaign trail, and that's what he was 80 years old, couldn't tell it, looked much younger, and that's what he does. So it's all about honoring the service of those people who really sacrifice, and that's what this weekend is to me.
Mike Haffner, Missouri State Representative, also running for State Senate. What about you, your service, your background for people that don't know, and what this weekend is about for you?
So, Pete, I appreciate you having me, and you know part of my story. So for 20 years, I flew off aircraft carriers, and Mike, one of my first carrier qualifications was on board the Lexington.
Which is where I was.
That's right.
Is that
That's
right?
Yes.
No kidding.
And so I landed the A4 Skyhawk, an advanced jet
Saw
training,
a lot of those guys
on board the Lexington.
Amazing.
But, in my 20 years of service, the Navy gave me some great opportunities, but it was also a very difficult time. I was an F-18 squadron commanding officer, and as you know, I led combat air patrols over New York City following the attacks on our country on 9/11. For 3 consecutive deployments, I planned and led air wing strikes out of the Arabian Gulf throughout the Middle East. And with those experiences, I formed relationships that are going to last a lifetime. But what this weekend means, this is a reflective weekend. Just during Desert Storm, I lost 2 guys out of my squadron, Pat Connor and Barry Cook. And on another flight, when I was leading a combat strike, I ended up hanging a 1,000-pound bomb on the edge of one of my wings. I was way out of asymmetrical limits. I could not go back and land on a carrier. As the flight lead, I am responsible for every member of my combat flight, and we do what we call a chicks dry, chicks wet call to mean that you're safe, you're out of combat, you're going back towards the carrier. We had great hits on this individual combat event. All of my chicks were feet wet. They were out of the combat area. I knew I was going to be going to, and I remember the outline field. We were going to have to go and land and get this 1,000-pound bomb off of my wing so I could get back to the carrier. I was excited. I had recorded hits. Bombs were on target. We were on time. We did everything that we needed to do. And when I got back to the aircraft carrier, I immediately was summoned to the admirals. And they said, "We lost BJ." I didn't know it. And we spent the next few hours evaluating what happened to him as he was lost at sea. That's what this weekend is about. It's going to be a very reflective time, thinking guys like Pat Connor, Barry Cook, B.J. Dwyer. And Pete, there's a lot of others. And my wife and I are going to spend some very quiet time on our Christmas tree farm. And we're going to reflect on that incredible sacrifice that was given in defense of freedom.
When you guys think about this weekend and the countless names that, you just listed there, Mike Haffner, and that we talk about for those who did sacrifice it all, what about the toll? Mike Thompson, you referenced some of the guys who didn't want to talk about what they saw in Vietnam, what they went through in Vietnam. How much of that does get overlooked where there's not maybe that comfort level in wanting to discuss some of these things?
I think they don't feel comfortable talking about it because they don't know who might be able to relate. I've got one friend who I go to church with, and he served in Nam, and he never talks about it, but he found out that I had served. And then when we were by ourselves, I started asking him about, what had happened, and he was able to open up and tell those stories. But I don't think he feels comfortable sharing with just anybody because I don't think he knows how they're going to react, or those guys, particularly coming back from Nam, were not treated that well to begin with. So I think maybe they're a little hesitant for that reason as well. But then some of them, they just don't want to relive it. They don't want to relive. They're trying to put it out of their mind. I mean, you've got a lot of these fellows, I think the younger guys with the PTSD problems, that's it takes them a long time to get over that. And that's a tough deal.
Yeah. Well, Haffner, how much of this, too, then, is also just, let's be honest, now you have less people than ever enlisted and enrolled, and people may say, hey, younger people, younger generations can't relate, don't want to relate, don't have any connection to our services and people who did serve. Is that part of it, too, potentially?
Yes, it is. And this, and Mike, I appreciate the way that you discuss this because we got a much deeper issue within our society in that we got to get these veterans to open up. And sometimes they will only do it with other veterans.
Right.
But one of the things that we've been very aggressive about within Missouri is getting veterans treatment courts, getting PTSD evaluation and treatment. This is the part that's really needed. But as you know, within our society is very divided. But there ought to be a bridge between what our veterans have done, the incredible sacrifice they're doing, and to be able to bridge part of this divide.
Mike Thompson, Kansas State Senator, is in our studios on a Feature Friday, along with the Missouri State Representative Mike Haffner. Both men served. They are now serving in a different way in our respective state legislatures. So here are the numbers, guys. Between 1965 and 1975, at least 70% of the members who were U.S. representatives and U.S. senators had military experience. That number, most recently, is at 17% for the U.S. Senate. 17 senators are veterans. And in the House of Representatives, 18%. It has fallen off a cliff the last 50 years. Let's start with you, Mike Haffner, as to why you think that is, and also how maybe that's led to some of the issues that we have in our politics today.
Well, Pete, it has made a difference. And I will tell you that veterans understand this concept of sacrifice. We have way too many people serving in politics today that are there for themselves. They're looking for the next rung in the political ladder. They're looking to serve themselves and their self-identity. And as the conversations that Mike and I have had, we've talked about this concept of the Constitution and how you protect it. We're in different states, but the concept is the same. Veterans understand service, and at least in the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate, those individuals that have served are dedicated to protecting the Constitution, and that's a foundational element that permeates every piece of legislation. We need individuals that understand the Constitution, that understand the Bill of Rights, that understand the concept that went through the Federalist Papers and was the foundational element of the Declaration of Independence. That is the foundation. It is a starting point. We need to get back to that.
How about you, Mike Thompson? You see these numbers falling off a cliff. What do you attribute it to, and how important? How does it change your mindset when you do have that experience serving this country and then taking it to a state legislature? In your case,
well, and Mike and I were talking before we came in. It's interesting. We both worked on the Foreign Adversaries Bill in our respective states, so we understand the real threat. I think a lot of people do not. They just see, well, I see these ads for Alibaba all the time, and they extol the virtues of Alibaba being, we're helping American businesses. But we're doing it through a Chinese company, which we know, if you understand communism, they are required to spy on us. They are required to engage in espionage. That's just part of the deal, and there are some people over here who have been their families in China have been threatened, and it's a very difficult situation. And I think we understand that. We also understand teamwork, because as a military, every person has their role. I was on the carrier supporting guys like Mike who are flying on and off, and the sacrifice, and we were right there. I think that a lot of the young folks maybe don't understand why it's important to serve anymore, or they don't respect the Constitution anymore. They think it's gone. We have to be able to defend that. We only have two guys in the Kansas Senate that have served, myself and Rick Bellinger. There's more in the House, but I do think we see things a little bit differently, and certainly when you join early, you grow up.
Yeah.
You just grow up, and you realize that it's not all about you.
Something I think about, too, though, is just the way the politics now is so driven by money. You've got to have money. You got to know people with money. If you're a veteran coming back home and you want to serve in a political capacity, you've got to find the connections to raise money and fundraise, even at the state level. I mean, these state Senate races aren't cheap anymore.
No.
How much is it, too, the way the game is now played, where it's not just about being the best candidate, it's about being a candidate, but also having the financial backing that it takes to run one of these races?
That's tough, Mike. I don't know, Mike.
What do you think, Mike?
Well, there's a combination of things that are involved in this, and I think that another conversation that Mike and I had is we have entities outside of the elected officials that are making a determination of the definition of conservatism. We used to be within the Republican Party, the party that supported agriculture. We were the party that supported business in order to enhance economic development. Is it difficult to have those contacts? I moved into Missouri, and as a Christmas tree farmer, I had an individual, I'm not going to mention him, but he drove out to my house. He sat at my kitchen table, and he said, Mike, there's two guys filed right now to run in a House seat, this seat where you live. We need you to serve. Just like you served within the Navy. He looked at my background. He said, it's time for you to serve your state like you served your country. And so I think the what we did within the military is necessary, but we got to get back to the foundations, not only to the Constitution, but these concept of how conservatism enhances agriculture, businesses, the grassroots effort. That is the type of stuff that is lost, and it was exasperated by what happened with COVID. And you've interviewed me about this landfill situation in Jackson and Cass County. What we learned from that is when the grassroots gets involved, we get back to the foundational elements. We protect property rights. We protect the Constitution. we protect those foundational elements. We need to get back to that foundational concept.
And that's what you've done there in Cass County. Representative Mike Haffner is here on KCMO with the Kansas State Senator out of Shawnee, Mike Thompson. So what about you, Mike Thompson, when you look at that element of politics, the way money plays such a big role, and the fact that a lot of veterans, even if they want to serve their community in a different way, they're like, where do I even start? What do I do?
Yeah, that is tough. It is tough. And that was an element that I had no idea. As you know, I was sort of thrust into politics. Yeah. But I found that there are patriots who want to support candidates who will uphold their constitutional duties and don't look at this as a grandstanding moment. And so I've run into some incredible people that I didn't even know existed as a result of that. And so there is that strong element of patriotism there that's still, that current is there. You just don't see it as much because they are not highlighted on the media. And they are, in fact, people are working against them. So they're very cautious about who they support, but they are there. And you have to make those connections. But for a young veteran coming up who does want to serve, you almost have to get with somebody who's been in that political realm to help guide you. You can't make those connections on your own. And those people who do have the wherewithal to be able to support a candidate enough to be able to make them viable, they have to be able to trust you. And so you have to win them over. It's a very delicate and interesting position to be in, and I've run into people like that who want to serve, and the money is an impediment. It really is, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Take me through the last couple of minutes here, guys. We'll start with you, Mike Thompson. We know some of the drama right now. You guys are going to be going back for a special session. You're going to be trying to figure out some kind of tax relief for Kansans. Right. In the next minute or so, how do you feel about the possibilities of that taking place at this point?
Well, we haven't actually announced the date of the special session, but I think it'll be around June 10th.
Okay.
That's the day I'm hearing. We're going to go in and try to do it again. I personally, if it were me, and I think you and I discussed this last time, I would go big. But I don't think we have the votes to do that, so I think there will be some kind of a compromise. We've got to protect that, get rid of the income tax on Social Security. I've had a lot of the elderly and seniors talk to me about that, and I think that's important. I think the large portion of that tax bill that we had will stay intact. There might be a little bit of fudging around the edges to get the price tag, quote unquote, down, which I still think is crazy because it's a taxpayer's money.
Yeah, it's our money,
We're depriving them of their own money and calling it a cost to the government. I just hate that.
I do, too.
That's where we're at.
Yeah, you're right on. And Mike Haffner, we're kind of hearing and finding out what Governor Parson is going to sign here over the last few days. When you look back on the legislative session in Missouri, what do you perceive as one of the biggest wins outside of that landfill deal that you were a big part of in Cass County?
Well, I think that, and I'm going to start off not with a win, but some of the problems that we had. I mean, you know how rushed our budgeting process was because of these ongoing filibusters, which weren't about policy. It was about self-serving politics. And so we were rushed through the budget. And quite frankly, Pete, I know the governor's going to cut a lot of money out of there, and it needs to be cut. And so with that being said, what did we do that was really good? We did a great job of shoring up our elections again. We made a good, hard stance on that, and we got to continue to do that. That is a foundational element of who we are. We took a hard look at education. All right, we provided some opportunities in school choice, but we also made sure that there was adequate funding through the foundation formula for our public schools, for our charter schools, for our private schools. We provided that. Minimum teacher salary, $40,000. The education part is a critical component of this, but we got to look at the tax structure. Just like Mike stated, these are the people's money, and we got to be very careful how we spend it. And one of the problems I see within the Missouri budget, we spend money great. We don't look at reducing the size of government.
Well said. Mike Haffner, Missouri State Representative out of Cass County. He is also running for State Senate. Mike Thompson, Kansas State Senator out of Shawnee. He is up for re-election this year. Gentlemen, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here on a Friday of Memorial Day weekend. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on KCMO.
Thank you, Pete. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Pete.